Good evening. It is Wednesday, October 12th at 6 p.m. We're in the Kaiser Civic Center for the Kaiser Planning Commission meeting. Second order of business is to welcome Youth Counselor, try my microphone here, Youth Counselor Amanpreet Sandhu. So welcome. I'm gonna brag on you just a little bit before you get to talk. You were prepared for a speech, right? 5 to 10 minutes is what Debbie said? No. So, Amanpreet was actually at the volunteer coordinating committee the same night that I was, and got to listen to her talk to the volunteer coordinating committee about kind of her passions and desire to work with the planning commission. And we're really excited to have you on here. This is the most exciting committee there is in the city. Right after the paint drying committee. No, I'm kidding. It's a lot of fun. It's very good information. You've got the most incredible staff to work with, and the planning commissioners here are all awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what your goals are here, and then I'll open up to any of the commissioners if they've got any comments.
Okay, well, my name's Amanpreet. I'm currently a senior at McNary High School. Well, last year I kind of joined with like a different career goal in mind, but like as life goes as a teenager, everything kind of changes. So like at this point, I'm kind of just here for like enjoying and like seeing a different part of the world, like a community, just because like my parents are definitely not into any sort of government thing. And so it's like kind of a new thing just for our family and stuff to be involved with like local politics and like see how like this affects the community at large. So that's kind of it.
All right. Commissioners, any questions, comments? Well, do you have anything, Shane?
Oh, I just wanted to say welcome, and I know I introduced myself before, but I'm really excited to have you here. And you know, planning is not always the most interesting thing, but there are a lot of things that this committee and this commission they consider rules that affect our city and livabilities of our neighborhoods, and they do a really good job of working through those things. So I'm just excited for you to be here, so welcome, and yeah, let us know. Dina's normally with us, but she wasn't here tonight, but either myself or Dina at the city, if you have questions on any of the things, feel free to call or email us anytime, and we'd be happy to sit down and talk with you. Let's clear things up, okay?
Thank you.
You got the opportunity for some great mentorship for some really good people, so it'll be good. All right, swearing in of commissioners, Lawyer, Grentz, and Hutches. I don't know, do you guys want to do one-on-ones, or do we want to ask the city attorney to do us all at once?
All at once.
I feel like one-on-one would be fun.
No.
All at once?
I disagree.
2 against 1?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll save you a little bit of extra reading there, Mr. Johnson.
All at once is this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all in free your eyes, raise your right hand, repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Matthew Lawyer,
Being first duly sworn,
first duly sworn,
upon oath say
that
I will support the Constitution
of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Oregon,
and the Constitution of the State of Oregon,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of a planning commissioner for the city of Kaiser, according to the best of my abilities, for the term of my office. Congratulations.
Yay. That's exciting, and I just want to thank the volunteer coordinating committee for all their work and keeping the continuity of this board. It's important. We've been through a lot over the last couple of years, and I think I had to twist Commissioner Grentz's arm at least 5 times to convince him, but you know, he literally phoned it in.
Yep.
I mean, it's a literal statement.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
You did great. I mean, considering you weren't able to watch the body language of the committee, you did a really good job. So obviously you're still here. And of course, Ms. Hutchins, thank you so much for being here. It's great. I'm so excited. Sincere, totally sincere. All right, approval of minutes, consideration of the minutes for September 2022. Debbie sent those out in email. Any comments, additions, changes, or we'll take a motion?
I move to accept minutes as presented.
Second.
Got a motion to approve the minutes as presented by Commissioner Saldivar and a second by Commissioner Herb. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimous, and I don't think we have anybody absent tonight, Debbie. All right, appearance of interested citizens. No one. No one. Shane, are you going to be an interested citizen? No. Okay, moving forward. We have no public hearing tonight, but we get to hear from Shane and City Attorney Johnson on the River Cherry Overlay District Development Update. Can we pick an acronym for that? Would that be the RCODDU?
Oh, I like it.
RCODDU?
Yeah,
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, so tonight, we talked, Chair Lawyer and I had talked last week, and he'd asked, hey, maybe next month's meeting you give us a little bit of an update of what's been going on in the River Cherry Overlay District. So it's kind of fun tonight. One thing that's good is everybody find some wood and knock on it, but I'm pretty sure we're gonna have one of our shorter meetings of all time tonight. So that's kind of cool.
Just go.
Yeah, we're done.
You said that last month and you were 15 minutes beyond
Hey,
your
you guys
benchmark.
asked a lot of questions, and I went through a lot of slides really fast last week. This week, I've only got 13 slides, I think, guys. So,
Are they 13 real slides or 13 planner slides?
No, they're 13 pictures mostly.
Oh, good.
So,
I should be able to
really, it's
understand.
kind of fun for me. We're going to do a little bit of a show and tell tonight. And as much as anything, we're not asking for I'm not asking anything from you guys. It's really more of a, hey, here's the kind of things we've been seeing that have been developed once we implemented the RCOD. It was adopted in 2019, December 2019, we immediately moved into a pandemic, so that was cool. But this is kind of like the highlights of what we've had for land use. We've done 3 different residential partitions. None of those have actually been built on yet. So we're not sure what they're gonna do there. We know we've talked to them about some plans, but with House Bill 2001, some things have kind of changed for residential construction. We did 1 5-lot subdivision with single-family dwellings and attached ADUs. We've granted a few variances for some side yard setbacks and a density one. And we've had 5 different multifamily projects and 3 different mixed-use projects, which is kind of cool because that is what the RCOD kind of envisioned. We rezoned all of River Road from commercial to mixed use, if you remember, in hopes that it would allow some greater opportunity for not only housing, but also business opportunities. So we'll just kind of jump right in, and I grabbed some pictures of the different projects that we've done, and I've kind of put them in order of what I think is the order that they came in. There might be some of them were kind of close together. But this one is, we call it the Sonic River Mixed Use Project, right next to Sonic, the big building that went up on that kind of remnant parcel that was there. It was kind of the first one that came in right after the River Cherry Overlay District got adopted. In fact, they might have been in pre-planning before the overlay zone was adopted. But basically 13 apartments, 5 commercial units on the ground floor. Those units are, I think there's a salon, I think there's a couple salons and an office space there. So I mean, they've done well. They've rented up. A couple of things that I kind of wanted to highlight on all of these is what impacts did the RCOD have for them? And in this case, the building is up close to that sidewalk, which before the RCOD, we wouldn't have allowed it to be that close. But with the RCOD, we actually require it to be that close. So they provided some pedestrian connections to River Road. The building's up closer, which worked great for their site because of the topography. So the ground floor commercial, you actually access from the parking lot behind. And it was kind of nice. They were able to utilize the existing parking lot area, which we know parking is an issue, but it seems like that complex is working okay. They have some signage up for business use on the road during business hours, but then it can be used for the folks that live there to park in that area for overnight. So that's kind of the first one. Like I said, it's kind of that modern look, and you'll see this building design a couple times in these slides because this particular developer has a model for some of these smaller mixed-use projects, and they like to build them, and they seem to be successful. So the next one is...
So Shane, real
Yes.
quick, have we had any conflict with the parking there since everybody's started working from home?
So not that we have heard. I think that complex, because there's a very large apartment complex
Right.
behind it that was already there. So I think the biggest conflict I'll say that we had was some confusion with Sonic, because Sonic had owned that kind of remnant parcel and they had their access through there.
Right.
But they sold it and they didn't retain any kind of an easement or anything. So now Sonic all comes in off of the side street.
Right.
So at first Sonic didn't like that too much, but it's hard. Property owners make their choices, and that's kind of what happened there.
Good.
But so yeah, I haven't really heard any other than the regular. There was a lot of complaints initially of, well, where's everybody going to park? Well, it's overparked based on our standards, and we haven't gotten complaints, and I haven't heard from the complex that there's a lot of problems. So, one of the things the developer on that project did is that most of the units are smaller units.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. Back to the setback on the front with the sidewalk, do you remember what the difference is?
Yeah, so with the RCOD, it's a 10-foot setback. Previously would have been a 20-foot setback minimum.
And it's required.
And it's a 10-foot
Maximum.
setback, yeah.
And do you remember what section number the RCOD is, since my table of contents isn't updated?
It is 103.
Sounds good.
I'm not positive on that, sorry, Shannon.
That's all right.
Somewhere, it might be.
Only a lawyer, want to read as we
Yeah.
go along.
Okay. So that's the Sonic River project. Already we're off schedule, guys, but we'll speed it up here. The next project we had that's in the RCOD is on Plymouth, and this was just kind of a standard apartment complex. It was zoned RM, so not mixed use, but remember with the RCOD, it captured RM and RS properties kind of on the fringes. And they were able to do a little 12-unit apartment complex. They're 2-story buildings. And the big thing here was they got a little bit of a benefit for density, because in the RCOD we allow 24 units an acre in the RM zone, as opposed to I think 22 in the normal RM zone, which in this case the site was small, so it really got them 1 extra unit. So it went from an 11 to a 12. So not a huge benefit, but there was a little bit of a benefit, but pretty standard. So this was kind of frankly, it was a little bit of a bummer, but I think the project turned out nice. This was a little 5-lot subdivision off of Sunset. It's served by a private access easement called Horner Lane. And there was an existing house on the property and a large piece that had been just kind of run down and dilapidated for, honestly, as long as I can remember. I did code enforcement on it 20 years ago. So finally the property sold, and the developer had a plan originally to come in and do both attached ADUs and detached ADUs, which is unique to that River Cherry Overlay District. And so they came in and they met with us, and they were actually going to do 4 lots and have it be attached and detached ADUs. And it was kind of funny because with the increased density requirements in the RCOD, they technically weren't allowed to do that because 4 lots didn't meet the minimum density. But we had talked with them and said, I think staff would probably support a variance if you wanted to go that route, but ultimately you'd have to seek a variance, because we can't count ADUs as density because the state said we can't. So, but when they got through engineering and kind of started laying out the site, there was a large sewer easement at one end of the property that they couldn't build on, and ultimately kind of abandoned their plan for the detached and attached and went to just doing attached ADUs. So though they retained the existing house and they built 4 new units, they all look very, very similar. But they're kind of cool. I mean, it has the main garage kind of goes with the bigger portion of the house. The bigger portion of the house is a 2-story section, and then the ADU's kind of on the side, a side entry with just a 1-bedroom ADU. And so that one is all finished and completed, and I think people are moved in, maybe all but one of them now. So anyway, but that one, like I said, kind of the takeaway for me was, okay, density is density, but it's not always density, because ADUs we don't count, but really they ended up doing 5 lots with 9 units, where they were going to do 4 lots with actually 12 units of living space. And so that was one where it may be something that in the future we want to consider tweaking some changes. And like I said, that one, from a staff level, we would have definitely been in support of them pursuing a variance for that. But anyway, that just is what it is. Here's another apartment complex project. It was again on a residential zone property right there on Shamala, just to the west of River, not too far. There was an existing house and a duplex on this site. And they retained both structures and were able to squeeze in this 12-unit apartment complex in there. And it is 3 stories, so it's a taller building. It pushes right to the maximum height allowed in the zone. But you know, the project is done, and I think it turned out pretty nice. They did retain a really nice large specimen tree out front, which was great because original plans, they were talking about bringing their driveway in there because that's where the existing driveway had been, was kind of in between the house and the tree. And in order to get in there, they would have had to tear that down completely. So it worked out better, and they kind of tucked the parking back around behind the Grange on property they owned. And I have kind of heard that maybe the Grange property might end up being redeveloped at some point in the future, but we'll see about that. But yeah, this one, you know, again, the density benefit was there for them. Again, didn't really give them a whole lot, but it gave them a little something. So let's see, what was the next one? This is kind of a big one. I think you guys have probably all seen this one on Cherry, right? When these buildings started going up, we did get some questions. Man, these buildings are close to the road, and they are. They're 10 feet away from the road. But this one, you know, it's a bigger mixed-use project, so the ground floor, those 2 front buildings that are 2-story, they're doing ground floor commercial uses in there. I haven't heard if they've identified actual users for those yet, but they have 2nd-story apartments on top of those, and then in the back, there's basically 2 buildings on either side that are large apartment complexes that are 3 stories in height. So this one, you know, like I said, there was a couple things that I think were kind of nice about this project, or that are unique about the project, and that the RCOD did give us some additional tools as far as from the city level. And one of the things is in that area of Cherry Avenue, there's been concern about how you get people in and out of the sites that front on Cherry, because Sam Orcutt Way's right there and there's a traffic signal. So this developer had to complete those improvements, complete the traffic signal, so that it's going to now be functioning. So it'll be a signalized intersection. And because of our access control and management standards that are in the RCOD, we were able to require, which we would have done it anyway, but it might have been a little bit squishier on our authority, but we were able to require this developer that as you enter the site, there's a parking lot that goes north and south, and so they're actually providing easements to the properties to both the north and the south, so that in the future, when those develop, all of the traffic from those sites will come out at the signal as opposed to multiple driveways on Cherry, which is one of the things that we want to kind of avoid, having all the driveways on River and Cherry Avenue. So the consolidated driveways at the traffic signal is kind of a great thing, and being that was the first property that came in, it really made sense to do it the way that we did, or the way that they did. But yeah, I think that one, it is interesting because I know one of the buildings that's a little bit at an angle, and in order to meet that minimum 10-foot setback, you know, their original plans came in and they were set back further, and I said, guys, you have to be closer. It's a 10-foot maximum setback. So they kind of brought the building so the corner of it gets to that 10-foot minimum, but it's even that, I mean, if you've ever walked in front of it or driven in front of it, it does seem close, but that is kind of what that urban form is imagining that River Road and Cherry will feel like in the future, where buildings will be up closer and it'll be more of a pedestrian-oriented kind of uses. So that's the Cherry Avenue, and it's not quite done, but I got a call from the developer this last week. They're getting close. So I think that one, they're gonna be looking for getting things finalized up, and I know there's still some finalization of the easement language that has to be done and some recording things, but I know he's wanting to get that wrapped up and start getting people moved in. And then here, this one's a little bit out of order, just in that we call this like the Clearview Apartments, and there's actually 3 separate properties. It started with one, which is that picture on the bottom. That was the first one, and it's all completed. People are moved in. It's a little 8-unit complex. On this one, there's basically this set of mixed-use properties that are kind of right around the corner from the other one on Clearview. And they're skinny, and they were kind of 1950s houses or 60s houses, just ranch houses. And he bought one house and came in to redevelop and was trying to figure out how to fit the density that we're imagining for multifamily or for mixed-use projects, and was really struggling to do it. And so in this case, we actually granted a minor variance to the side yard setback So instead of a 10-foot side yard, they were able to drop it down to 8 feet. I mean, building code lets you go to like 3 feet or less if you do firewalling and stuff. And it's a interesting one because he's got this plan that worked. And so now he's done the second one that's getting closer to being completed, and there's actually a third one in the works now. And so, there's one house in between two of these apartment complexes that I know the developer is trying to kind of negotiate with the owners to say, hey, I'd really love to buy your property. And then we'd have like 4 8-plexes kind of in a row that are these smaller apartment complexes. So, it's one of those where we're a little bit stuck because of our land supply and how parcelized our land base is, and there's a lot of smaller parcels. Ideally it would have been awesome, and he wanted to, but owners weren't willing, but he really wanted to buy all of them and then do it all in one fell swoop kind of deal. But it didn't work out that way. But I think, the nice thing is the flexibility that we've built in has allowed a project like this to kind of replicate itself, which kind of results in a little bit larger project in the whole.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is there any information on, like the average rent for these places?
I don't know that.
They don't tell us that?
No, I mean, all the developers always kind of tell me is I'll ask questions about that, and they'll just say kind of market rates. So these projects that we are seeing built, we haven't seen anybody come in and say, hey, we're going to do something that's definitely like affordable housing level. But yeah, so I don't know what they're renting them for. I know I kind of try to watch Zillow sometimes. And so I know like when the Sonic River Apartments came in, I want to say those 1-bedroom units were renting at like $1,300 or $1,500, and that was a while back. So I know 2 bedrooms they're up there. I mean, Kaiser rents are high. So, but yeah, I don't have, and I didn't check on
Because
that.
besides the pedestrian idea and, having this mixed use, it was also to try to produce more housing.
Yeah.
And so like the one that had like the ADU units.
Yeah.
That's a rental unit, I'm assuming, on the side?
Yeah, so with that one, the developer that originally wanted to do those, he actually sold all the lots to a different builder.
Okay.
And so I know at least one of those units was bought by just an individual that wanted to buy it and they live in it. And I can't remember if they moved a family member into the ADU or if they just rent it out as some rental income for them. But I don't know about the other ones on that.
But we're really not seeing, some, like I said, more affordable housing.
Yeah,
being built.
affordable housing. And I think that is the challenge. I think the affordable housing levers that you can pull as a city or as a developer, I think in order to see more of that, you either have to have a very philanthropic developer who wants to do it, and maybe get some, federal grant funds and some things like that, or you really have to be in a position as a local government where you can incentivize that type of development, which frankly I think requires cash that I'm not sure the city of Kaiser has. But,
Well,
yeah.
I think that's an important piece that you brought up because that's part of our H&A. And that was a big gap that we saw in the housing needs analysis where there was a significant lack of affordable housing. The question that I might have, though, is are we seeing it translate sort of organically in that people that might be living in older apartments are now moving into this, which is freeing up some of those older apartments? I don't know if there's any way to quantify that, but, I don't want to get, I think it's important. It's challenging because you're absolutely right. Unless you have, a bunch of state dollars coming in for the development and we don't have a lot of SEC waiver opportunities. There's very little I think that Kaiser can do Kaiser's a fairly affordable city to build in.
Yeah.
But we don't want to miss that mark because I think the H&A is going to, if we're not hitting that, I think the reality of even more and more restrictions coming down are probably very high. And then we get put in a position where we're told that, hey, you shall, make these accommodations and stuff. And I think that's really important to kind of keep an eye on. I don't know how to encourage it appropriately, but that was definitely a key component in the H&A that I think we heard a lot about.
I would agree 100%. And I know it's a little bit more anecdotal than data-driven, but I know there's definitely a desire from council, from planning commission, from our advisory committees when we went through the H&A process in a concern and a recognition that housing prices are high, and what do you do as a city to keep those things affordable? The one thing that, and it's hard because there's a huge balance, and like, it's different all over the state, and frankly, it ends up, I always kind of come back to, it seems to be the market is the market.
Yep.
And the market is a little bigger than a local jurisdiction can control. That being said, I think the role that we do play, and that you all have played and the council has played, is in allowing some additional flexibilities like the RCOD does. It allows pathways forward for different housing products and different housing types and sizes, that while they're not affordable subsidized housing, they may be more affordable than what previously was available on the market. Like, for example, Sunset,
Yeah.
historically before the RCOD, before we allowed ADUs and things like that, those would have just been straight up lots, single family dwellings that were detached. And the market entry point for detached single family dwellings is, $400,000. Maybe $350,000, but not very often are you seeing anything new getting built for that. So there is that element where it's not ideal, and it doesn't speak necessarily to home ownership opportunities and affordability, but it does still provide a level of housing that we know that we need for our community. We need homeowner homes, we need rental homes, we need all those different kinds. So, but yeah, I think it is really.
I just think my key frustration in this is the consultant billed this as you'll be able to work downstairs and live upstairs. That's not happening when you're spending $1,300 on a one-bedroom apartment. Like, it's just not practical.
Yeah.
I mean, unless it's like they own the business downstairs and they're walking upstairs to their home. So I think the product is not necessarily, and it's fine in this market, but it's not delivering on the promise or the anticipated hope that I think we had as a planning commission when we made those recommendations a couple of years ago. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's market. I get it. I'm not mad at it, but I think at the same time, like, the state has this demand and expectation that we're meeting affordable housing requirements. And while you're right, having apartments there on Sunset is cheaper for the user than maybe a home, but I can imagine if they're a two-bedroom apartment, they're probably renting for $1,300, $1,400, $1,500. Well, that's not too far off on what a mortgage is for a $400,000 home.
It's probably around $200 a square foot. One of the houses on Sunset, 1,500 square feet, was $3,000. One of the ones you showed in the beginning.
$3,000 a month
Yeah, it's about $200 a square foot.
to rent.
For rent, yeah.
Jeez Louise.
That's on a brand new place. If you get an older place, you can go lower than that. But for something that's brand new like these, I'd imagine they're close to $200 a square foot.
Well, but I think that just articulates that it's not that's not affordable for probably most of us sitting up here.
Right.
And let alone people that are, working in those, like, this is just, they put this demand on us with this expectation, and the demand is not delivering the expectation. That's, I think, where my frustration is.
Sure.
Commissioner Herb and then Commissioner Burson.
Maybe Matt, this, or Shane, are there county resources or programs that help developers build housing for?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I think at a high level, you have the Oregon Housing Community Services LIFT program, which it's a great acronym. Basically, it's low impact fast track, or I don't remember exactly the acronym, but they dump millions of dollars into those programs. The city could waive SDCs, they could do some tax incentive, things like that. There's rebates and rates and stuff like that. I mean, as far as any programs within the county, the only one that I can think of right now would be the Community Development Block Grant, which is a federal housing and urban development program. But from the county, it's a very small bucket of money. It's like $1.2 million to $1.3 million a year. And, that's a lot of money. In fact, the program funded a project in Kaiser this year. But, I mean, in the scale of these apartments, like, I don't know what it costs to build an apartment, but I imagine it's more than $1 million. So it could bring that price down, but then you have the HUD requirements for all the area median income, and you have all these sort of other layers associated with it. And you have to do environmental, you have to meet all it's just such a process-driven thing that a lot of developers frankly shy away from unless that money is part of a whole other bucket of money that they're getting from other sources. Commissioner Person?
So
Did that
I-
answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think this is really interesting in that, like I say, and it's nice to see kind of like different, I guess, shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
But the other concern I have here is where these are being built has traditionally been kind of a lower rent.
Right.
And so we're, taking something out that may have cost less money to live in and putting more money in, which I understand they want more because it's new and stuff. But I think we got to keep kind of that in the back of our minds when we start talking about these projects up here. And I know that the developers don't really talk to you about the rents. Like I say, if they did, then we would know that. But that doesn't become a consideration on approval of these projects. And like I say, I think it's interesting how this has helped fit projects into maybe some, square pegs into round holes, trying to get something in there. And I think it's important. Like, I look at this one, this looks like a very, modest, apartment setting, one we've probably seen a lot of times. And then when you tell me it's like, maybe $1,300 to rent for a one bedroom, it's like, wow.
No, and I think it's kind of interesting, these projects, the Cherry mixed-use project, these Clearview Apartments, that area was actually zoned mixed. We didn't change the zoning on that area.
Right.
That's been zoned mixed-use since, I want to say, it might have been 1998.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been zoned mixed-use a very long time, and we've had people poke around at those properties over time and ask questions. And, for a while there, we thought something was going to get developed on one of them, an expansion of kind of the Partridge Lane Apartments that's there, because that family still owns a piece right next to the Cherry Avenue project that's going on. And I really do think that a lot of it kind of boils down to what does the market support? What's the return on investment that developer or that landholder is willing to put out, and what are they going to get back on it? And so and it is, but Commissioner Burson, you're absolutely right. I think those are some of the concerns that all of us have in areas where you do have those lower rents. A lot of times you have a lot more aged housing stock that's there, which means marketability of that property is a little more affordable for somebody to buy and demolish, or buy and renovate and add to it. Whereas you're not going to see that in a house that was built in the mid-90s or the early 2000s, where the initial price point is so high that you're not going to see somebody come in and dump a ton more money into it, because they'll never get their return on investment.
Well, I mean, the building we're in is surrounded by a lot of very large lots.
Yeah.
With aging homes, so.
Maybe you can't answer this question, but are these developers and these owners Oregon people?
Yes.
All of them?
So far what I've showed you, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I
Commissioner
just got to
Sullivan.
clarify. I said $2 for rent. I'm sorry, I was confused in my head. It's $2 a square foot or so to rent.
But it's still about $3,000.
Yeah, it's still $3,000.
I mean,
That
$3,000
number
is
right. I was
$3,000,
thinking,
yeah.
yes, $2 is not $200.
That's a lot of money for an
Right,
apartment.
yeah. I mean, I haven't seen in this area, maybe you can find some places around $1.50.
Rent my house too cheap.
Yeah, I mean,
And those are not like really, some places are $1. You get below $1.50, they're not really nice places to live in. There's, there's the old, the landlord isn't fixing the heater, the toilet doesn't flush, that kind of stuff.
And I think one of the ththings to remember too is that, at least from an academic or philosophical point of view, this is where the argument comes into play of, well, rents are so high because there's a lack of available housing for people to rent. So if you have more of a supply, then that kind of like, 7th, 8th grade economics class of simple supply and demand comes into play. Now, we all know, living here, being in Oregon for as long as we have, and being in the Valley, it's not that simple. But that is part of at least the consideration that, especially when we're dealing with implementing state legislation and things like that, those are some of the thought processes that I hear thrown around quite a bit. And, arguably, hey, if we had a ton of apartments available all over town, that might theoretically bring rents down. But we know that the housing problem is not unique to Kaiser.
Right.
It's not even unique to the Salem Keizer area or the state of Oregon. It is a national issue with housing supply.
This goes back to a fear that I had, and when we had this conversation, and we hate the word, but it's gentrifying these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Because you're changing the makeup of these neighborhoods in historically low-income areas, and you're driving the rents up, and everybody looks around and goes, oh, well, now I can get more out of my property. And so all it's doing is pushing the people that have been in these neighborhoods for a long time out of their area, because at $3,000 a month for rent, or let's bring it down to a reasonable level of $2,200 a month for rent, a lot of these folks can't do that.
Yeah.
And so like, I get the need for more demand, but my question is, where are these folks going? Where are the folks that, were living in that home that got bought by a land, and that's just my concern is like, and I brought that up when we had this conversation with the RCOD, and it's like, oh, we'll get affordable housing, and the consultant just drove that home, we'll get affordable housing. Well, that's
Right.
proving not to be the point. And granted, it's gonna take probably a decade or longer and a lot more land before we really start seeing that cumulative impact on the affordability of these apartment complexes. So
And I
this is
think-
all great. I'm looking at the adverse
Yeah.
side of this a little bit.
No, and I think one thing to remember with that is that is one of the reasons why when we establish zoning, like that's the expectation of what that property is going to develop as.
Right.
And so that's one thing that I also kind of want to, kind of the last slide, I'll kind of highlight that a little bit, but, one thing I would say is that the development we've been seeing in the RCOD, anecdotally at least, I would not attribute it to, oh, we made these changes and all of a sudden these things happened.
Right.
There was a lot bigger pressures, market pressures mostly, profit margin pressures, that have kind of made it be good timing for it. But I mean, when we're talking about, oh, what's the difference between that apartment complex before we made the changes or now? It's one additional unit.
Yeah.
It's instead of building 12, it was, they could have only built 11. So, I mean, we really, the changes we've made, at least in the projects thus far, they really haven't, I don't think it's made these huge significant impacts, but I think like anything, you put something out there and people start hearing about it, it piques the interest and they start to go, oh, well, maybe I should look into that. It's kind of like ADUs. We allowed ADUs for decades here.
Yeah, but then we started talking about it.
Until it started getting talked about, we didn't see many of them get built, and now we're seeing, a decent amount every year, half a dozen or more getting done every year. So anyway, all that to say, we'll kind of move on. I've only got a few more here. Here's another small mixed-use project on Plymouth. Another one on Plymouth. It's interesting. There's 3 projects on Plymouth all next to each other also. This is right behind Kaiser. It used to be I still call it Jade Garden, even though it's not Jade Garden, but there's an existing house there. They retained the house. They're building a 3-story building there out front and another apartment unit behind, and then actually they're in plans to build another duplex unit. They did a property line adjustment with the restaurant and got some of their property, purchased it from them so that they could accommodate parking and provide a little more buildable area. And, again, similar, very, very similar design to what we're seeing. Again, there's a developer who has found a product that they like, that's been successful for them. And, that one is, it'll be interesting to see. It's, it's just currently under construction, so no idea what those are going to be when they get to the point of renting them or anything like that. But, again, that ground floor commercial, apartments above, and I think, Chair Lawyer, you kind of alluded to this. It's kind of mixed use light is what we're seeing at this point. The next one, this one's kind of a big one. I'm sure you've seen this one on North River Road. So those are kind of like what the elevation looks like. They are 3-story apartment buildings. There's 4 separate buildings. This one, they didn't want to have the buildings as close to River Road as we require. But they're pulling them up to where the property line is. It won't feel quite like it's only 10 feet because there the right-of-way is a little bit wider, but they're gonna have kind of shared entries out of each of the buildings that have pedestrian connections right out to River. There's a little more windows on the street-facing elevations than what we would normally require, but being in the RCOD, that's one of the things. If you're on River Road, you have to have a certain amount of windows. And in the RCOD, we don't require quite as much parking, which, from last month's meeting, we are at least requiring parking. That's all I'm going to say. But I took a couple pictures of the construction. If you haven't seen it, the site looks very different than it has for my entire life. And one of the things to highlight here is we've received a fair amount of concern from neighbors and passerbys and random folks emailing me, what are you doing? You're ruining my city. And the thing that I have to remind folks, and I remind myself of, because I don't always love that certain things happen in our city kind of on my watch. But this property's been zoned mixed use for decades. It's been part of the Shema Activity Center since 1992. It's been zoned mixed use since 1998. But that particular strip of land on River Road has been these long-standing homes on these large parcels. And in this case, you had a parcel where I believe a property owner maybe passed away, and it was on the market for quite a while, and the developers come in and they're doing a 66-unit apartment complex. And that is one where mixed-use zone on River Road allows 28 units an acre, so they've got a few more units than they would have had if they weren't in the RCOD. But, really, it was probably going to be apartments anyway. But, this one, there's no commercial component to this one. This developer, I know he's indicated to me that these rents might not be quite as high as some of the other rents in town. I think there's a little bit smaller units that he's focused on. But again, I think probably with those developers, they meet with their realtors and they determine what is the market demand or what can the market obtain, and that's what they get priced at. The other thing, this one, they're not done yet. They're doing significant grading on the site. There used to be the big hill, and they're bringing that down, and they kind of spread that out. There's a giant retaining wall involved. So it's kind of a big project. But for sure, man, my daily commute back and forth to work, it's going to look a lot different than I've been used to. So, I think it highlights the fact that as these things redevelop, it does change. And it is sometimes hard for folks to kind of go, whoa, what's going on? But that's just sort of the reality of where we're at. So I wanted to share that one with you. I know you probably all have seen it and heard things about it. Again, not a huge amount of things that have come in. Here's another one that's just an apartment complex on Plymouth. This is actually in between the mixed use one and the first Plymouth apartments I showed you, the standard apartments. This one is also zoned RM, so it's like the RM mixed use split is right there on the line. And this one got picked up by the same developer that's doing the mixed use project. There was an existing fourplex on the property that was pretty rough. There's quite a few calls that our police department have responded to over the years there, and we've had a lot of code enforcement issues on that site. So, the good news is that this site is being very much improved. But again, it's going to be basically nine new units. They're going to sit out in front of that building. It's kind of a cool design. I didn't have plans for this one. Obviously they're not building it yet, but it's two buildings that looks like one building. So it's all a common shared roof structure. And then they kind of have that center stairwell that goes up to the upper stories. And the other thing with this one is that when they came in and they looked through it, they actually came in, they requested a minor variance to the density to allow a little bit more. They were right on the edge. And with our density, it's like 28 units an acre. Mm-hmm. So when you have a parcel that's, I guess it'd be 24 units an acre here, but when you have a parcel that's 4/10 of an acre or 5/10 of an acre or 3/10 of an acre, you do the math and we don't round up. So I think they would have been allowed outright to have, it went from 11 to 13, and I think it was like 11.7 or something is what they could have had, but we don't round up because you can't build 0.7 of a unit. So that minor variance, it resulted in them getting 2 more units, but it was really like 1/6 more unit or something like that. And for them, those 2 additional units really made sense for the project, for the amount of infrastructure that they got to put in and the underground stuff and all that. So, and I think when it's all done, it's going to really work nicely with the complex right next door that they've built. And so it'll kind of function as a little bit, it was like instead of two little small complexes, it'll kind of function as a little bit of a larger complex because there's going to be a walkway in between the two buildings that connect out to the street and whatnot. So that's the Plymouth Apartments, and that was my last slide, so that was kind of good. And so kind of this was my takeaway slide. I mean, things are happening. Like really when you think about, when I think about my career here, a lot of times we'd see like, one, maybe two apartment complexes in a year, or maybe like two apartment complexes in like 5 years sometimes. And so we've actually seen quite a bit of activity in the last few years. And again, I think we generally see a lot of activity when the market is hot. It just is kind of the nature of development. What we have seen is we've seen the density provisions and the parking provisions in the RCOD, the slightly reduced parking, slightly increased densities. We've seen people take advantage of those, and we've seen those actually work for their projects. I think that with the density, there's been a lot of input from developers, and we've talked about it here before. And frankly, moving into the future, we're probably going to be looking at actually allowing even greater densities, which ends up with small parcels, those buildings going more vertical. So where historically it's been the 2-story apartments that we normally see, we're starting to see those 3-story apartments. And the River Cherry Overlay District kind of envisioned that 4 to possibly even 5-story buildings along River Road and Cherry Avenue. The other thing we're seeing with this is that the challenges remain for us. We have small lot sizes. It's very parceled up. And so oftentimes for a developer, the smaller the project, the harder it is for it to pencil financially. Because you're paying review fees, you're paying for infrastructure needs, and when you have a larger amount of land to spread essentially that assessment over, it makes more sense. The bigger the subdivision, the cheaper it is going to be to build on a kind of per door kind of deal. Same with multifamily projects. And then Chair Lawyer, you kind of alluded to it earlier in the night. And so one of the things that I looked at it was, while we are seeing some mixed use, 3 different projects are mixed use, I kind of affectionately refer to it, we're sort of seeing a mixed use light. Right. We're not really seeing that, restaurants, coffee shops on the ground floor with people living above. We're really seeing more of the, hey, here's some office space that we're renting out to somebody, and here's some housing that we're renting out to somebody. And so it's kind of almost, in my mind, functioning a little bit more like a classic commercial development project. You just have different types of renters involved, or different tenants involved, or different, lease folks. And I think that's somewhat indicative of where we're at as a city as a whole. Sometimes when you start to see those more true kind of mixed use with multi-stories of living and the more service-oriented, activity-based kind of uses, you have a little bit greater population density in those more downtown type cores. The takeaway for me is with mixed use, you kind of do have to start somewhere. And as the market kind of bears that out, realistically, developers will be more willing to take more risk if it shows that our community supports that type of development, which, good or bad, is irrelevant in this case. It's just kind of the way that it is. The other thing that we've seen, and we kind of alluded to it, the single family stuff, we really haven't seen anybody really utilize the benefits that we kind of outlined when we adopted that RCOD, where we allow some additional. I do have one project that I'm pretty sure is going to be happening. I've got a guy who bought a house on Dearborn, and they're in for permits for an attached ADU, and their plan is to get that done and then build a detached ADU. And talked with him quite at length, because with the House Bill 2001 provisions, the kind of world was their oyster of what do you want to do, and for him, he felt like the site made the most sense to do the detached and the attached versus trying to add on to the home and do a fourplex. And frankly, I think it will end up looking really nice, and it won't have a big impact to kind of the character of the neighborhood, because the house will kind of still look the same, and the heights won't be a 3-story building or anything. And that kind of leads me into that kind of the next thing, which is, I think what I'm seeing and what we're getting a lot of questions on is that House Bill 2001 stuff that we spent this last year working on. And so I believe, although I don't have proof yet, because haven't started having stuff happen, but I really think that more than likely in those RS zones, whether or not you're in the RCOD or not, you're gonna see people probably going the House Bill 2001 route versus an attached ADU and a detached ADU. Because frankly, there's more flexibility for them and they can get more bang for their buck with that. And then the other thing that I think is kind of interesting, which isn't great when you think of things like the bad G word, gentrification. It is spelled with a G, right? Yeah, no, it is. But we've clearly seen in just these examples, there's two different areas where we've seen these pockets of redevelopment, where essentially one development has kind of begat additional developments. Clearview, you ended up with one that's now turned into three, which I think has a high probability to turn into all four. And you've got Plymouth, which was one that turned into two and has turned into three. And so, I think that when these redevelopments happen, and I think it's for a couple reasons. I mean, frankly, I think if you're a long-standing resident who owns a house and an apartment complex goes up next to you, you go, hey, maybe this guy wants to buy my place too. Right. And, frankly, they make their choice. They probably make lots of money on their deal, and then they move to somewhere else, and then it kind of does start to change that fabric of the neighborhood a little bit at a time. So those are kind of just the takeaways that I had from it. And like I said, I wanted to take an opportunity to kind of fill you all in on what's going on in Kaiser. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on too, but this was kind of more specifically focused on that River Cherry Overlay District. And I kind of wanted to put it out there for a couple reasons. Well, one, chair lawyer asked me to, which I always am going to do what I'm asked by the chair. But no, the other thing
Ice cream next time?
Yeah. Oh, I'm down. Let's do it. We'll be November though. Maybe we need to do like cookies instead.
Yeah. At least you didn't say pumpkin spice anything.
Cookies in November.
Okay.
But the other thing is as we've been talking about all things climate friendly areas and equitable communities rulemaking, barring changes because of other things that are out there in the world right now, as we move forward, based on the way that the state rules are currently written, I kind of wanted to show you, hey, here's what we've seen. And knowing that if those state rules stand the way that they are, we're going to be seeing more of that, but we also are going to have to kind of revisit our RCOD. And at least in part, we'd probably be looking at, instead of those, 28 units an acre, 3-story buildings, probably having to allow for, not require, but allow for even greater densities and a little bit greater building heights. So like right now we have kind of a 50-foot max. I think the state rule says that we would have to go up to at least a 60-foot max. So, you'd be looking at, 4 and 5-story buildings could become the norm if it's supportable. It's hard in construction practices. My understanding is when you go above 3 stories, significant increase in cost of construction. So again, I think it depends on the size of the project, but kind of wanted to put that out there because one of the desires of that River Cherry Overlay District was, as we see these mixed-use developments start happening, as property owners decide to redevelop their sites, one of the points is to make it where people can live and work, live and be entertained, and make them more walkable, more bikeable, things like that. And so that's kind of the focus of these climate-friendly rules as well.
Shane, Southeast Kaiser is desperate for park space.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to put a park in Southeast Kaiser. So is there, I know on the Parks Board side, we haven't talked about any land acquisition, but I'm just looking at the map here and there's basically no space. Ben Miller is the closest part, it's a Kaiser part for anybody on Plymouth or even at the end there of Sam Orcutt. Are we in jeopardy of missing our parks to people requirements?
Well, based on the Parks Master Plan, no. But that's where you get that dynamic of you have a certain amount of acreage of parks for your city, and as far as localized though, that does become a little bit of an issue.
Because, I mean, historically, it's been something that's been brought up by the Southeast Kaiser Neighborhood Association.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've got the Clagger Creek natural area there by the middle school and some other stuff like that. But, you know, I think it's a big thing, especially for people that want park space. I mean, you know, you're not going to walk or ride your bike very often from a lot of these areas because those are all fairly busy arterials and connectors and stuff like that. So I know there's not a lot we can do about it, but I just kind of want to throw that out there. If something comes up and somebody's just desperate to sell one of these large chunks of land, we might want to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because I think that'd be really important. Commissioner Herb?
Thank you, Chair Lawyer. Is there an update on what we're doing with the other cities to try to arrest the climate friendly?
I will defer to Councilor Johnson on that.
The only thing I can tell you is that we had 2 more parties join. Marion County and Oregon City have joined.
Commissioner Burson, go for it.
So the lot right there at Verda in the Parkway, looks like they just got some trees there, and there's an older home back in there. So are they just developing that for the home, or is that also going to be an apartment complex?
No, so that property is actually zoned residential single family. When it went on the market, I had a ton of phone calls, a lot of questions. Different folks had asked questions about doing different developments on it. My understanding, I just talked to the new owner a couple weeks ago. They just bought it for their house.
Okay.
So as of right now, they don't have any plans to do additional development. So we'll kind of see what happens with that.
Thanks. Well, I just noticed they took a lot of trees out and they
They did a bunch of clearing in there and kind of cleaned it up. It was pretty overgrown. I think they're building a fence.
They did.
I know they had a desire to build a really large shop, and I had to tell them, well, you can't build a really large shop. Sorry, that's not allowed in our rules.
How large a shop can you build?
600 square feet is our maximum size in Kaiser.
Even though there's shops in Kaiser that are much larger?
They
than 600?
predate those rules.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So you can have-
So, I mean, I've been here for 25 years, and the largest shop we've approved is 720 square feet. That'd be a minor variance to the 600 square foot standard, and I have approved a few of those variances on large lots that don't have redevelopment potential. So,
All right, thanks.
All right.
but yeah, that's, if nobody else has any more questions, that's it. Hey, I got through it. So,
Did a good job, and I appreciate the response to that. I mean, it's good to see what's going on. I think it helps us. You know, Kaiser Times actually did a pretty good article on the River Road apartments there. So I'm sure there's more to come. All right, Councilor Duran, good evening. What wonderful tales and stories have you got for us tonight?
I don't have a whole lot, but I did go to the LOC, League of Oregon Cities Conference last week. And so I went on a field trip to the Prineville, their new wastewater treatment facility, which was very interesting. They had done something that nobody else had done in the area and changed from a mechanical wastewater system to a, what do they call it, innovative natural wastewater treatment system, which was, they use more land, but it cleans the wastewater naturally, which is awesome. We won't have anything like that we need to do in Kaiser, but the takeaway I got from it was them thinking out of the box.
Yeah.
And they saved the city $48 million by going with the system that they did. Yeah, so the mechanical system was gonna cost them $58 million, and they spent right around $8 million. So it was just crazy. So that was kind of a big takeaway, going to look at that. It's like, and then I'm thinking, well, can Detroit do something like that? Well, they can't, because they can't dump into the
There's that whole pesky three basin
The
rule
three
thing that
basin
exists.
rule just kills everybody. You know, it's like, can they pump it up over the mountain to the other side? And, you know,
Give it to sisters?
I'm trying to think, yeah, think out of the box.
I'm very familiar with that project.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that, that I did. And Senator Wyden spoke at the thing. And, you know, he's got an ad out talking about where he's trying to limit developers and speculation to help landowners, you know, people buying property. And he gave that in his speech. And I'm thinking, you know, it's kind of hard to limit things when the market runs everything. So, you know, we're dealing with that here. The stuff that's being done is based on market, and market, they can sell rent out projects, you know, their apartments for, you know, $2,000 and $3,000 a month, and that's what's going to be built. That's just what's going to happen. So, you know, that was kind of what I've done in the last couple of weeks. So, it brought back a little bit for me to talk about here.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Youth Committee Liaison, what did you think? First meeting, any takeaways? You excited? I'm going off script here, but I just want to see what you think. Any regrets so far?
No, that was actually pretty interesting. I will say that. My brother's in real estate, so like this entire like property stuff is kind of familiar to me. So it was fun.
Well, if you take this all back and talk to your friends at school, your number of friends will reduce. I'm kidding. No, it's really interesting stuff, and I think it's going to be, the more you get involved with it, I think, and I think it's going to be helpful, you know, because you'll be able to talk a little bit about that project going on River Road and some of these other developments. And so you had a great teacher tonight. Thank you, Shane, as always. And we're glad you're here. So thank you. All right, council representative for October 17th is Commissioner Hutchins. You good for that?
Somebody switch with me, I'm out of town.
17th. Let me look at my brain.
I do it, but I'm in Maryland.
What? I have something going on this. I swear I have something going on the 17th.
Right?
What is this? That's Monday.
I'm at a work meeting, so
Phone it in.
we just have an option.
If nobody can, we could have somebody report, we could have Sarah report at the beginning of November.
You know, I'm good. I can take it. Because I think I owe somebody anyway, so yeah, I'll do it. Yes, I'd be happy to. Shane kept us alive and vibrant, and only 2 of us fell asleep. We got sworn at. It was great. All right, sworn in. I'm on one tonight. All right. Any by the ways, witty statements, remarks? I will say October 29th, Clyde Creek Watershed Council is going to be doing a great cleanup project down at Wallace House Park. I'll be sending out some details on that, but we're needing 5 groups of 5 to 6 people. Going to be cleaning up rubbish and planting some bushes and seeding and doing all kinds of great stuff. So keeping that outflow valve healthy and happy and all the wonderful things. It is 7:02, and I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you all.